Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a story that's really quite profound and frankly unsettling. It's about the recent violent death of Charlie Kirk. Now, he was, well, undeniably a prominent figure in white Christian conservative America. His passing has really sparked a huge national conversation, as you might expect. But what immediately jumps out, looking at the material we've got, is this potent, almost, tragic irony. Here's Kirk, a really staunch advocate for gun ownership, someone who saw force as like a key part of white American patriotism. And yet he himself was killed by a gunman whose background sounds eerily similar to his own. So our mission here in this deep dive, it isn't just to recount Kirk's life or this event. It's really to go deeper, explore those broader, often violent historical threads that, well, our sources argue are woven right into the fabric of white Christian America. We want to help you understand what this one single shocking event might actually represent in that bigger picture, that historical context. And as always, just to be clear, our commitment here is to objectively present the insights, the information directly from the material provided. We're not here taking sides, not endorsing any particular view. It's really about helping you, our listener, get a clearer, historically informed perspective on what is, let's face it, an incredibly complex topic. So let's kick things off by getting a handle on who Charlie Kirk actually was based on these documents. Charlie Kirk was only 31, just 31 years old when he was shot and killed at a public event. It was on a college campus out in Utah. He was the founder of Turning Point USA, a really powerful organization. And the material describes his debate style honed for college campuses and social media. Apparently, this style consistently produced these, viral video clips of sharp comebacks, very much geared towards that online space. He fully embraced what he called the MAGA doctrine. He saw it as this grand vision for American renewal, revival, that America is the greatest country in the history of the world. That was his core message. And his approach, famously, maybe deliberately confrontational. He promised to play offense against secular left. He seemed absolutely convinced that directing, confronting the left and promising to fight their illiberal ideology with state power when necessary is the key to winning everyday Americans. That was his strategy. And he built his movement fast, launched hundreds of chapters of Turning Point USA. He engaged students with these events, described as entertaining, argumentative melees, things like the tell me I'm wrong tables, always focusing on those hot button issues, right? Like free speech, censorship. And it's also worth noting his really close ties to former President Trump. He was a trusted advisor, even got credit for rallying significant youth support for the 2024 election.
Yeah, and what's particularly illuminating from the material is how it spells out the specific ideology he was pushing. He argued quite forcefully that America was born in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, okay, and that it was established on, quote, a bedrock foundation of white Christianity and white male supremacy that was authorized by the Christian church. That's a direct claim from the analysis of his views. And this wasn't just like an abstract idea for him. It directly fueled his advocacy for strengthening belief in white Christian conservative America. And crucially, restoring the political, economic, and social order, not just of any time, but specifically of the white Christian America of the mid-20th century and mid-19th century. So it wasn't just looking back fondly. It was a definite blueprint he was promoting.
That is a powerful and, very specific vision. Did it actually catch on? Did the movement he built resonate widely?
Oh, absolutely. The research suggests that a majority of white Christian America agreed with Charlie Kirk and expressed their beliefs in measurable terms at the polls. So yes, it definitely resonated. His activism actually shifted, becoming much more overtly religious around 2019. That's when he co-founded the Falkirk Center. Its explicit purpose was to, quote, explain the link between the gospel of Jesus Christ and American founding freedom, making that connection direct. And the COVID-19 pandemic seems to have really hardened his view that political and spiritual fights were deeply intertwined, one and the same almost. This led him to make these strong calls for Christians to rise and stand against government mandates he disagreed with. He even publicly said he was preaching a hot gospel and bringing a nation to repentance, very prophetic language. He famously called the 2020 election a spiritual battle, right? And led chants of Christ as king. So he really did merge politics with a very specific kind of religious zeal.
Wow. Okay, so starting from that really deep ideological place, the way he died, it becomes even more chilling. What's incredible is the parallel the material draws about his killer. It wasn't some, outsider. It was a 22-year-old who graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA. Someone raised in Utah in middle-class white America by Republican parents. That description, for anyone who knows Kirk's own story, growing up north of Chicago, suburbs, typical schools that, quote, most white Christian conservative parents send their kids to, It's almost identical, isn't it?
It's remarkably similar, yeah.
And the assertion from the research is just stark. That Kirk's strong support for gun ownership and use of force as an expression of white American patriotism, combined with his incendiary hostile rhetoric designed to demonize, denounce, and dismiss the humanity of those he disagreed with, that this inevitably fueled hostility.
Right.
And the analysis concludes this was by design. He just didn't intend for that hostility to target him, which is wow. And this leads us to this really big overarching theme that comes out of the material that, quote, violence is the white male American way, particularly white Christian conservative American males. It's a massive claim. How do the sources really back that up? Where do they trace its origins?
That's a really good question because the material does try to trace it historically. It argues the roots go way, way back to the arrival of Europeans. Think about Christopher Columbus. He arrived, the sources say, with three things: a Bible, an army, a doctrine of discovery. And this doctrine of discovery wasn't just some legal thing. The sources frame it as a kind of foundational spiritual justification. It basically gave divine permission to conquer, control, enslave, even kill with impunity, a really powerful idea that shaped things from the very beginning. And then fast forward, you look at the Confederate States. They operated, according to this analysis, under the belief that their Christian God had bequeathed to them the power to rule over all men and women on this continent. For them, the idea of a multiracial, multicultural society was completely unacceptable, anathema to their ideals. And this belief system directly fueled the Civil War to maintain that specific order.
Right. So even after losing that war, how did that thread, that particular ideology connected to violence, how did it carry on?
Well, the post-Civil War Reconstruction era is presented as is really key here. The material describes how white Christian conservative men who lost a hard-fought war to maintain control were subjected to an effort to reform into the kind of racially inclusive society they despised.
Yeah.
You can imagine the resistance. You see it immediately with the Freedmen's Bureau. This was the first federal agency funded by white men's taxes to fund a federal agency designed to benefit black people. Think about that framing. And what's really telling is that it was put under the Department of War for protection, because there was an explicit understanding even then of the violent nature of white Americans who might resist it.
Wow.
And then, just weeks after signing the Freedmen's Bureau into law, President Lincoln is assassinated. The timing, according to the sources, is no coincidence. It underscores that immediate violent pushback.
Okay, so that's immediate post-war. How does the thread continue?
It continues very dramatically with Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor. He basically launched a war on the Freedmen's Bureau. He was impeached over related issues, and he gave this seething address to Congress warning about white radicals trying to undermine the power of white men and subject them to, quote, Negro rule and Negro supremacy, using that exact inflammatory language.
Yeah.
And then Christmas Day, 1868, Johnson issues what the historical records call the White Man's Emancipation Proclamation. Not for slaves, but a blanket pardon to all white men who had participated in the violent insurrection against the United States. And this act, the research argues, triggered more than a century of violent white terrorism targeting black Americans wherever they lived. And the numbers cited are horrific, killing more than 53,000 by the time a white male Supreme Court in 1896 officially ruled that this nation consisted of two distinctly separate societies in Plessy v. Ferguson. So it was presented as a chilling pattern, politically motivated violence often getting a pass or even encouragement from the top.
That's, yeah, an astonishing and deeply disturbing pattern described there. How did this then show up in more recent times, say the Civil Rights era?
The sources argue the patterns just continued. You have the Negro Revolution, starting around 1963 with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
It was explicitly about nonviolent direct action protests. Yet the material notes it was met by white Christian America with institutional violence as expected. That expectation is key. President Kennedy's assassination in '63, shortly after he started voicing support for civil rights, is placed within this context. And the black church, which was so central to the movement, it faced incredible violence. Quote, black churches were burned to the ground, black children were murdered like the Birmingham bombing. And disturbingly, the historical accounts emphasize that, quote, white Christian conservative churches turned a blind eye, while the men who identified with white Christian conservative ideals perpetrated violent evil upon black Christians. A profound silence or complicity is alleged. And the concluding observation for this period in the material is also pretty stark. America today is flying its symbolic flag of white supremacy at half-mast by order of President Trump, for whom Charlie Kirk leveraged his influence as a strong Trump advocate and ally. And draws a line, you see. a thread through centuries, connecting past actions and ideologies to recent symbolic acts.
Okay, so given all that deep and, yeah, often unsettling historical context provided, what does it all mean when we look at the immediate reaction to Charlie Kirk's death? The material we looked at really highlights a striking difference in how grief was expressed publicly. It details how the killing of Charlie Kirk caused the majority of white Christian America to mourn. President Trump used the power of the presidency to honor Charlie Kirk, employing national symbols like the flag, and some Christian leaders even publicly called him a martyr.
Right, and this reaction, especially when you see it through that historical lens we just talked about, it does raise some really important questions. The analysis points out something quite specific. Curiously, none of the gunshot victims this year or any other year has caused such an immediate outcry among the majority of white Christian conservatives in America. Think about the contrast. The profound lack of similar mourning or any public display of concern or support from that same group after Dr. King was assassinated in '68. Or even in 1996 when 140 black churches were set on fire, an event serious enough to lead to the Church Arson Prevention Act. There's a definite difference noted in the scale and sort of the nature of the public response.
That is a stark contrast. So how does the material interpret this specific outpouring for Kirk? What's the analysis there?
Well, it offers a pretty sharp critique, actually. It even takes aim at the phrase thoughts and prayers, suggesting it's become almost like a joke or a meme meant to mock what it calls the curt, pretentious platitudes of pious pretenders, essentially calling it a hollow gesture in many cases.
Okay.
It goes further, asserting that at least some of the national outpouring of grief is contrived for the purpose of political leverage. It's not entirely genuine emotion driving it. There's one quote that really sums up the argument. As long as the impact of a violent white Christian America was mostly felt by non-white populations and liberal and progressive factions of white America, the white Christian conservative church was piously silent and supportive. That's the claim.
Okay.
But, the quote continues, when the gun violence that's tacitly supported by white Christian conservatives in America was felt by one of its own key advocates, the white Christian conservative landscape of leaders responded in a manner conspicuously missing from many similar tragedies. Quote. So the conclusion drawn is that this reaction is potentially disingenuous or maybe oblivious to the historical hostilities, or perhaps it's a kind of fake concern for Charlie Kirk, which masks a seething anger for the untimely loss of an influential young voice. Really pushes you to question the motivations behind collective grief and public outrage.
And with that, we bring this deep dive to a close. We've walked through Charlie Kirk's life, the movement he built, and then really dug into that deep, often disturbing historical context of violence within white Christian America, all as presented in the material you provided. The irony at the center of it all remains just incredibly profound, doesn't it? Kirk, someone who believed in and defended this historical process of, well, expressing disagreement through violence, ultimately had that same process claim his own life.
Indeed. It's a sobering thought. And as the sources remind us, history is not past, it is passed down to each generation. It doesn't just disappear. 8 generations later, the material argues, we're still seeing evidence of politically motivated violence in America. It persists. So given this deep dive into the historical record laid out here, maybe the question for you, listening, is how do power, belief, and violence continue to intersect in America today? And what threads of truth, maybe uncomfortable ones, might still need to be identified and confronted in our own generation? Something to think about.